What's going on, guys? If you've been here before, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't, thanks for checking it out, and hopefully this will help you guys learn some new techniques or maybe even just add a little bit to what you already know. Now in today's video, we're going to be working on this shot from a vote campaign that we're doing in collaboration with hip-hop artist F1. And I'll leave a link to the video that this ties into in the description below if you guys are interested. So let's go ahead and get started on this image, and we're going to start out here in Camera Raw. And this actually looks pretty good, pretty balanced, right out of camera pretty much. We were actually using a Flashpoint Explorer 600 camera right over here. I had my wife holding that up here, and it was double diffused in I believe it's a 28-inch softbox. So about 45 degrees to the right, and then feathered just a little bit, double diffused. So we balanced that pretty well, I think, with the background. I think I like the temperature where it's at right now. We're at around 4900 Kelvin. This was shot with the Nikon Z6 at 105 millimeters, also at f1.4, ISO 100, and 1/1250th of a second. So yes, we were in high-speed sync. And I can't really tell you exactly what the strobe setting was. I want to say it was right around 1/32nd of power. But anyways, so the only thing that I want to do here, for those of you that know how I edit, you'll kind of understand this a little bit. So I just want to pull down the highlights just a little bit here. And then I'm going to pull the shadows up just a tad bit, just to get some detail back in the shirt and in some of the darker areas. And then I'm going to pull the whites up just a little bit here. So maybe around 25 is good. And then I'm actually going to pull the blacks up. Most people would pull them down, but I want to kind of flatten this out just a little bit. So I'm actually going to pull back the contrast as well. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to selectively add that in Photoshop once we pull that in. Alright, so that gives us our kind of our flat profile there. And then I'm going to actually pull back on the clarity just a little bit to soften up the skin. And then I'll leave the texture where it's at. Vibrance and saturation, we're going to tackle that in Photoshop. Not going to worry about the curves right now. We will boost up the sharpening, maybe around 79 or so. And then to soften that out a little bit, we're going to take our noise reduction up to about 20. Now we can look at our HSL sliders here. And we have hue, saturation, and luminance. So what I'm looking at here is the sky is a little brighter than I would kind of want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that back a little bit. So our sky is going to be in the blues. Now keep in mind when you're doing this, you don't want to go too far because you're going to start to introduce haloing around the edges of these trees. And then also her pants are blue too, so we don't want to really darken those down too much at this point. So I'm just going to pull it down maybe to around -20, and then the aquas will also affect this, I believe. Yep. So I'll pull the aquas down maybe around -35 looks good, and we're still not losing any detail around these edges. And then maybe take our yellows. I feel like I want to kind of pull those up just a little bit. I'll leave our oranges alone because orange and red, those are going to be your skin tones, so we're going to just kind of leave those where they're at. And then I do want to kind of pull the greens up as well because we have these green trees back here. And when we start doing all of our editing, I don't want those to get lost in the background. I want you to still be able to see those. Alright, so that kind of flattens that out a little bit there. So let's go to profile corrections. And this is automatically going to correct for my Sigma 105 1.4 art. And then I want to pull back on the vignette because I do actually like the natural vignette of that lens for the most part, so we'll leave that maybe around 25. That looks pretty good. And that's all we're going to do here. We'll go ahead and open it up in Photoshop. Alright, so the first thing I want to do here in Photoshop is I want to go ahead and grab my crop tool and I'm going to crop it to 5:7, and that actually looks pretty straight to me. It might be just a little bit off, maybe about right there. And then I'm going to pull this up just a little bit to get rid of some of that foreground. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And I think that's the crop that I want. I think that's good. Now when you do that, it's going to change the layer to layer 0. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit layer and then flatten image, and that'll bring it back to a background layer. Alright, so the first thing I want to do here after the crop is we're going to try and add a little bit more color in this. And those of you that have watched my channel before, you know that I actually have a selective color preset that I use called ColorPop. And when I run that, it just basically adds a pop of color to all of the different colors here. So if I run through here, it's just basically going to add 20 to the respective colors. So -20 on cyan would give me +20 red, and then +20 yellow. -20 on magenta gives me green, so on and so forth until we get to whites. And then whites I put +20 on the blacks, neutral +5 on the blacks, and then blacks +2. So that gives us our color here. Now I don't want it quite this strong, I don't think, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that back just a little bit. So maybe around +60 or so. We'll turn that off and on, see what that looks like. I think that looks good. And one thing I do notice down here at the bottom is the sunlight's hitting it and it's kind of a golden light, but it's a little distracting in my opinion. So I'm actually going to go to my hue saturation, and I'm going to click on this little hand tool. I'm going to click here and drag and just pull some of that yellow out, and then maybe even pull some of that lightness down. And then I'll hit Control or Command I with the mask selected, hit B for my brush tool, and with a flow of about 30%, I'm going to paint with white, and I'm just going to paint this adjustment onto the area that I want to desaturate the yellow from. Okay, so there's before and after on that. It just kind of takes that attention away from that area and throws it back to where it needs to be. Next thing I want to do is I probably should have done this first, but I'm going to create just a regular blank layer, and then I'm going to use the regular healing brush, and then I'm going to make sure current and below or all layers is selected. I just want to get rid of a couple of these distractions. Like this here, I don't really like that, so I'm just going to sample this line here, and then I'm going to follow that line across the waterfall, and then I'm just going to start painting, and then maybe grab from up here a little bit, and then just get rid of that. Alright, so now that we got that taken care of, I don't really see any other distractions. Alright, so my next step is going to be frequency separation. I do have a full tutorial on that on my channel, so if you want to see that, go ahead and check that out. I'm not going to go over how to make it here or how to use it. We're just going to actually jump right in and we're going to use it. So I'm going to change my radius to 9 here, hit enter, and this is going to create a couple different layers here. This high layer is going to be our texture layer, the low layer is going to be our color and light layer. So I'm going to start with this high layer, and I'm just going to grab my healing brush, I'm going to zoom in, and then I'm going to use this to get rid of any imperfections in the skin just on the texture. So since I only want to work on this layer, I need to change my sample from current and below to current layer, so that way I'm only affecting this layer. So now if I hold the Alt button and then I click on an area next to the area that I want to fix, and then just go over it and just keep sampling and moving around. sample, move around. Now that you kind of see what I'm doing here, I'm probably going to fast forward through most of this. But one thing to note is she does have a bit of a scar here on her forehead. I'm going to leave that there because that's actually part of her that isn't going to go away ever. So I tend to try and leave those things in place. But blemishes, just anything that's not really supposed to be there or not there for more than a couple weeks, then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those things. Okay, now that we got that part done, I'm going to show you the before and after. So let me zoom in a little bit here. So there's the before and there's the after. And again, you'll notice that I just got rid of some of the blemishes, but I left some of the other imperfections there that are going to be there. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the low layer. This is going to be really easy, so I will show this whole process. So I'm just going to actually grab my lasso tool over here, make a selection just around the skin that I want this to affect. And I'm going to hold the Alt or the Option key, and I'm going to deselect the areas that I don't want this to affect. So like the eyebrows, the eyes, parts of the nose here. Anything with a hard edge, I'm going to take out of this selection. Okay, and the lips. And this is only going to affect the skin. Then I'll hold the Shift key here, and I'm going to add in more to my selection here. Alright, so now that we have our selection made, I'm going to go up here, make sure we have our color layer, our low layer, make sure you have that selected. Go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. So what we're looking for here in the radius is we're looking for the transitions. So we want to soften out these transitions of the color. So as I start to pull this up here, you're going to start to see that soften a little bit more as I go up. But now if I go too far, it just looks awful. Be really careful using this. For me, I think right around 6% is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and then hit Control or Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to turn the frequency separation off and on. So it's a subtle change, but it just softens it up just a little bit. Now the next thing we're going to notice here is we're going to have to tackle this difference in skin color. So if I grab, let me make a copy of everything. So I'm going to hit Shift Option Command E to make a stamp visible of everything. And then I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool. And then you're going to see when I click over here, we're getting something over here in the reds. But now if I click on her arm here, it's going to shift wildly over here towards the yellows. So we need to kind of bring those a little bit closer together. So in order to do that, let me go ahead and delete that layer. I'm going to go to Hue Saturation. I'm going to add a Hue Saturation adjustment layer. And then I'm going to grab this hand tool, and I'm going to click right here on the yellow part of the skin, which is actually going to show red because there's a little bit more red than there is yellow. And then we're going to take our hue slider, we're going to slide it all the way over. If we're trying to change yellow to more of a red tone, we're going to work with the left-hand side. For the next step, we're going to work with the reds, and we're going to work with this right-hand side of this slider. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I start pulling this left-hand side of the slider in, it's going to start slowly deselecting the red areas and only keep the yellow areas selected. So I'm going to try and find that middle ground, maybe right there. So there's still going to be a little bit of yellow up here, right around the mouth here, and then on the side here, and the side of this arm, and then this whole, pretty much this whole arm. Now that we have our selection, we can move our hue all the way back down to 0, and then we can start sliding it over more towards the red to get it a little bit closer. And I think that's pretty good there. I think the tones match. I feel like this is a little oversaturated, so maybe I'll pull back on the saturation a little bit and maybe even pull down on the lightness, and that kind of matches that pretty good. So I'll turn that off and on, and then I'm going to actually hit Control or Command I on the mask, and we're going to brush that in where we need it. So we're only trying to affect the skin, so 100% opacity, 100% flow, painting with white. We're going to go ahead and brush that right onto her arm. And then we're going to brush it onto her face. And you'll notice that she does have some yellow in her hair, so we don't want to brush over her hair because it's going to turn it more red if we do that. And I'm just going to try and go over all the skin, so even if I don't think it's affecting it, it might be affecting it, so I want to definitely brush over it, just so I don't miss anything. Okay, so that looks good. So now we're going to do another hue saturation. We're going to grab her head up here. That's going to show up in the reds. We knew that would. Slide this hue all the way over again. And then now we're going to work on the right side. So I'm going to pull this right side down, and you'll notice that there's quite a bit of red in these areas here, and then on this side of her face. So I think that's a good selection there. Pull it all the way back down to 0, and then start slowly pulling that one up, and that's going to actually move it a little bit more towards the yellows. And that's going to even that out. Alright, so it's affecting her lips. We don't want it to affect her lips, so again, we're going to hit Control or Command I with the mask selected. Hit B for our brush tool, and we're just going to brush that in to the areas that we want to mellow that red down. Make sure I get all these areas here. Now if I go over the blue on her pants, that's fine because it's not affecting that. All it's affecting is the colors that we targeted. Okay, so zoom out here, and I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to put both of these in a group. So I'm going to select both of these, hit Control or Command G. That puts them in a group, and I will name that Skin Tone. And that basically just evens out the skin tone, so we'll look at before and after. See how that just kind of evens it out quite a bit. And the next step we can take is we can go into Dodge and Burn, and I'm going to run that action. And all this is going to do is it's going to make 2 curve layers. One's going to pull it up for Dodge, one's going to pull the middle down for Burn, and then it's going to make a color fill layer that's set to color and using black. So it's basically another way to desaturate it without changing any of the tonalities. So if you just use like a regular black and white layer, that's not going to work because your tones are going to be different. So doing it this way just basically leaves everything as is but sucks out the color. And I'm actually going to add another curve, and I'm going to make this more of an S curve just to give it more contrast, and that's going to help me see what I'm doing. So now I'm going to hit B for my brush, bring my flow all the way down to 1%, zoom in, and I'm going to start with my Dodge first. And I just really want to even out some of these transitions. So we have a hard transition from the shadows to the highlights here. So I'm just going to make my brush fairly small and just kind of even that out. We don't really need to do a whole lot with this one. The light was really good. So we're just going to do very minimal dodge and burn here just to even out some of the tones. That may actually be pretty good, but let me check with my curves. So I call this a working curve because I can change it as I go. So if I start pulling down here, maybe even pull this down just a little bit like that. Pull this down a little bit more. And that actually looks pretty good. I can maybe even this out just a little bit here on the cheek. So I'm just going to burn that down just a little bit. And maybe a little bit over here on this left side. And I'll have to zoom in really close so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. So I'm working over here in this area on the left side of the cheek. For some reason in these recordings, sometimes my cursor doesn't show up, so I have to try and kind of tell you where I'm working at. And I'm just basically trying to even out any tonal differences. Anytime there's like a hard tonal edge difference, I'm going to darken down the light parts, and then I'm going to brighten up the dark parts just to even those out. Now normally when I do this, I don't zoom in this much. I'm only doing this because I don't think you guys will be able to see it if I zoom out. But you're going to want to zoom in and zoom out when you're doing this part, because you're going to see things zoomed in that you're not going to see zoomed out, and vice versa. You're going to see some things that you wouldn't see zoomed in that you're going to see zoomed out. Alright, so if I back up just a little bit, see, I can actually use my dodge and dodge this area just a little bit here. Maybe even that out. And up here looks pretty good. Now if I wanted to get rid of that scar, this would actually be a really good natural way to do it. Basically, all a scar is on a picture is contrast from where the light hits. So if the light's coming from this way, it's going to hit this part of the scar and light that up, and then it's going to leave a shadow on this side. So if you even that out, it just shows it as being pretty much flat skin. I'm not going to do it, but you could very well do that, and then you can actually do your full retouching with dodge and burn as well, using that same method and same concept. So a pimple basically, or a blemish, or whatever you want to call it, is basically just a raised bump on the skin that interacts with light and shadow. So when the light hits it, hits a blemish from one side, it's going to light it up a little bit more than what it would flat skin, and then on the opposite side it's going to leave a shadow. So if you even those out, it basically just looks like it's flat skin. Alright, so let me just go over this part here really quick. Maybe a little bit on the chin. We're just evening out these tones. And I think that's actually pretty good. So let me turn these two helper layers off, and then I'm going to turn the dodge and burn off and on. Off and on. And we just kind of got rid of some of these lines and some of these discrepancies. And I do see an area over here where I do want to kind of burn it down just a little bit. And I like to change my dodge and burn layers to luminosity, just so it doesn't affect the color at all. And turn that off and on again. That looks good. And I'm actually going to run another dodge and burn. This is going to be my global dodge and burn. The last one was more of a local dodge and burn. So I'm going to zoom out, and I feel like I missed an area here. Let me even this out. Okay. And for this one, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm just going to start smoothing and contouring using light and shadow and emphasizing what's already there. And this is going to kind of create more depth. So right now I'm burning, and I'm just burning down where I feel like the shadows are already at. And then I'm going to do the same thing with dodge, and I'm going to dodge the areas that I feel already have a lot of light in that area, or highlights. So down the bridge of the nose, there's a lot of shadow there. Across the eyebrows, darken those down just a little bit. Under the chin, maybe that cheek line. And then I'm not going to stop there. I want to actually do the arms. I'm going to burn that down just a little bit. And for this part, you can actually turn up your flow just a little bit. Maybe I'll go to like 6, because I really want to kind of accent those areas quite a bit. Okay, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. And there's a natural shadow on this side of the leg, so I'm going to burn that down just a little bit. And there's a natural shadow here, so I'll burn that down a little bit. Same thing with this arm, natural shadow on that side. And a little bit over here. Maybe under the arm on the shirt here. On this side, and then we'll switch over to dodge. And I'm going to dodge like her forehead a little bit here. Maybe the bridge of her nose. Under the eyes and in the eyes. Right under her chin. Maybe a little bit over the lips. And then I'm going to switch over to burn. And I always like to get the spot right underneath her lips and burn that down. It'll kind of make the lips look a little bit fuller and a little bit better. And maybe I'll even burn down this side of the nose a little bit. And then I'm going to go grab my dodge again. And I'm going to start dodging like the pants where there's light. I feel like there's light that hits here. And you can actually bring this down quite a bit and then even emphasize some of these little rollovers or wrinkles. Okay. And then same thing in the shirt. I could emphasize some of that there. So I'm just going to dodge this a little bit. Maybe on the top of the shirt here. Okay, and then next I'm going to go just a little bit in the hair. I'm going to add a little bit of light right across the side here. And maybe add some light here. Here. And then I'm going to burn this down right in here just a little bit. Right underneath here. And then we'll turn that layer off, and then let me zoom out a little bit. And there's the before, and there's the after of the global dodge and burn. So just kind of smoothing things out a little bit, adding a little bit more pop. And then I'm actually going to create another, we're going to go into levels here. And I'm going to create a levels adjustment. I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option. And I'm going to pull these blacks up just a little bit. And then I'm going to take the whites and I'm going to start pulling those down just a little bit. I'm not really worried about the background. I'm more worried about the subject, because we're actually going to paint this on. So as long as nothing's clipping on the subject, we're good. So I'm going to hit Control or Command I with the mask selected. Change my flow to 100%. And we're just going to paint that right on our subject. That's going to add more interest to the subject. Get the arms here. Get the rest of the shirt. And if that's too much, you can always pull back on the opacity a little bit. And I actually want to add that contrast to the foreground right underneath her feet as well. So there's our before, there's our after with the contrast. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do some color grading. Let's do a gradient map. So I'm just going to use one of these presets that everybody has, so you guys can maybe use this one as well. So I'm just going to move these sliders around just a little bit and get it kind of how I want it. I think that looks good there. Hit OK. And you can mess around with different blend modes. I think I'm going to put it on multiply, and I'm just going to pull it all the way back and then just start slowly pulling it up to add some more color and contrast. So maybe around 10%, I'll turn that off and on, and you can see what that does there. Okay, the next thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add a selective color layer. And we're just going to kind of mess around with these different colors and see what they're going to adjust. So let's go into reds, and we'll slide this back and forth and see what that does. I think maybe I'll do add a little bit of red to the cyan. I'm just looking at the background at this point. I'm not looking at anything else. So I'm going to slide the magenta over just a little bit that way. Pull back on the yellows a bit, and maybe even pull back on the blacks a little bit, turn that off and on. And it's subtle, but I kind of like it. So next we'll go into the yellows. And the yellows I kind of want to pull more towards blue. So I'm going to do +20 on the cyan. Maybe pop a little bit more green in there. And then I'm going to pull back on the yellow to add more blue. And then maybe I'll add a little bit of black there. So let's turn that off and on. And I'm starting to like that a little bit. And then greens, same thing. I want to kind of add some, blue or cyan into that. Pull back on the magenta a little bit, and then also pull back on the yellow to give that a little bit more blue. And we'll maybe add a little bit of black to that. Turn that off and on again. And I'm starting to like that. And cyans, that's going to be more the sky. We're going to really start pushing some color into that sky a little bit. Okay. And then we'll get into the blues. Again, that's going to be more the sky and her pants. So we'll push some cyan in there. Pull back on the magentas a little bit. Pull back on the yellow. And then darken it down just a little bit. And let's turn that off and on. And I actually like what that did. It kind of cooled it down a little bit, and then I actually really like what it did to the pants too, so I'll turn that off and on. And it gives it a little bit different blue into the pants. And we can mess with the whites just a little bit. And we're gonna see what we got here. So let's push some more cyan and blue into the whites. Maybe pull back on the magentas a little bit. Then in the blacks, we'll kind of do the opposite. We'll pull some, like a little bit of red, just a really small amount of red, small amount of magenta, and maybe a little bit of yellow. And then we'll bring that down just a little bit. Turn that off and on. The only thing is I don't like what that's doing to her shirt. So we're going to mask it out. Just the black part of the shirt. We'll just mask it out, all of it. And see what it's doing to the skin. Yeah, I think we'll mask maybe half of it out of the skin. Just see what that looks like. So around 50%. And I'm just changing opacity instead of flow this time because I want it to be even. So no matter how many times I go over it, it's only going to take out 50% of that. As long as I don't lift my finger. So turn that off and on. And I think I like that. So let's add another curve. And the reason why is I feel like the bottom of it is really still kind of starving for some attention. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit. I'm going to grab my gradient here, hold shift, pull down, and just kind of darken the bottom just a little bit. So I'll turn that off and on. The only other thing that I'm not really liking is the black in the shoes. We got a little too much red there as well. So I'm going to bring opacity back up, and I'm going to take all of that out of the black in the shoes. Alright, so there's before, there's after. I think that looks pretty good, and that is going to be our edit for today. If you guys like this video, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that bell so you don't miss any more of my tutorials.